Hi all, Ethan Sawyer, college essay guy here, doing my very best to bring more ease, joy, and purpose into the college application process. I sounded stressed when I said that. I don't know why. I don't feel stressed particularly. On this podcast, as on the other episodes, it's my job to interview brilliant minds in the college admissions world, analyze their genius, and break it down for you into a series of practical, actionable steps that you can take, whether you're applying to college yourself or helping somebody else apply. This episode's the third and final part in this little mini-series on standardized tests that I've been doing. So in case you missed it, hashtag ICYMI, part one was on test optional schools and the test optional movement. Part two was on how to reduce testing anxiety. And this episode, the one you're about to hear, is basically on everything else standardized test related. My guest, who's Adam Ingersoll, has spent more than 25 years working in SAT and ACT prep, working with more than, indirectly through his company, more than 100,000 students. And he's seen it all, and he knows his stuff. You'll see that really soon. In this episode, you'll hear his take on what is a good score, putting good in quotes. How much do SAT and ACT scores matter? Do students even need standardized tests? When should you take the test? What's the difference between the SAT and ACT briefly? Do students need the optional essay? A few words on the PSAT and some important notes for students with learning differences. Then we wrap up. He says something really interesting on how students should define success in college admissions testing. All that and more in a breezy 45 minutes. Let's get to it. Hi, friends, and welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Adam Ingersoll. He's the co-founder of Compass Education Group, which is a test prep company that works with thousands of students all over the world. He's recognized in the college admissions community as an expert on testing, definitely, and he's invited to give keynote presentations at about 75 schools and conferences each year. He started teaching SAT prep in 1993 while he was a freshman at the University of Southern California, about 20 minutes from my house, where he was also on the basketball team, which I didn't know. I want to ask you about that in a second. He worked in the admissions office and graduated magna cum laude, no big deal. After 25 years leading SAT and ACT prep for more than 100,000 students, Adam has pretty much seen it all. So thank you, Adam, for being with us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a huge college basketball fan. And so when I saw that you played it, I want to know about that. Talk to me about playing ball at USC.
I didn't know you were a basketball junkie. It's a little bit of an overstatement, Ethan. I was a walk-on.
Okay.
And for those who don't know what a walk-on is, it means you weren't invited to come to the school and paid in the form of a scholarship to be on the team. It means you had to try out. And what this really meant at USC in the mid '90s, the basketball program was not exactly high flying. Mm-hmm. And my friends across town at UCLA used to tell me that I was on the worst. They said I was the worst player on the worst team in the Pac-10, which was harsh but fair. Right. And the other jokes included that I was only picked because I was a nerd who would boost the team GPA. And quite frankly, I'm sharing with you only some of the nicer things that were said. So,
well, that's not the worst thing, right? Because you're kind of a, I don't know if you'd call yourself. Would you have called yourself a jock back then?
No. I mean, I was a gym rat. I absolutely loved to play basketball.
Yeah.
And I played enough that I could kind of keep up. But no, nobody saw me walking across campus and thought, there goes a three sport athlete,
Right.
No.
How did you, so I don't know how long before, but you're not that old. How did you end up getting into test prep from USC to test prep?
Nobody does it intentionally. Nobody goes to college thinking that the test that got them in will then become their life's work. Right. But in my case, I was a kid. I grew up in the Midwest, a big family. We certainly were not affluent, and I took the PSAT and did well, and that sort of opened up opportunities for college. It got me to USC, but there was certainly a gap between my scholarship and what it actually cost to go to USC. So I was fall of freshman year looking for part-time work and answered an ad in the student newspaper for SAT tutors for $15 an hour.
Boom.
Now, this is 1993. This sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So it was, at the time, it was good paying and interesting and challenging work. And I think the things about it that appeal to me, on the one hand, it is, if you'll cut me the slack, it is education. You are working with kids on academic material, and it is teaching. maybe in a mercenary way for something evil, but it is teaching. And it was competitive. And the thing about these tests is, I think in our culture, for the most part, we like scorekeeping and ranking, and for better or worse, one thing that these tests do is they give you kind of black and white feedback. You achieve a score increase or you didn't, and you get a number. So from a competitive perspective, I think that appealed to me, and it was one of the ways I always connected with students is, how can we approach this like a competition and just help you get to your potential, whatever that may be.
Right.
And try to have some fun doing it.
Well, two things that you're saying are making me laugh and making me curious. So one is, first of all, we have a kind of a similar path where after college, I went to a Big Ten school, but after Northwestern, I came to LA and I was like, ooh, test prep, that pays pretty well. Let me get into that. But I also had some positive affirmation, when I was applying to Northwestern, and they said that the essays were a big part of what got me in. And I'm like you in the sense of like, this is not what I planned to do, but have found, a lot of room, and it found it to be a lot of fun. You use the word evil to describe, or half jokingly, to talk about test prep. And it's funny because when I interviewed Bob Schaefer for this podcast, I asked him, are standardized tests evil? And if you're curious who Bob Schaefer is, you can go and listen to that one. But what's your take? I want to just ask you off the top. Are standardized tests evil? What do you think?
I am a tortured soul on this question. I'm deeply conflicted. I'm going to be, Bob Schaefer, somebody I know well. I'm going to be speaking at conferences in a few months with John Beckenstead, who's head of the enrollment financial aid at DePaul. He's another real powerful voice in this on these questions. Ethan, I don't know. I go back and forth on whether the SAT is sort of a necessary or at least inevitable evil. Mm-hmm. Or is it just simply evil and it should go away? Mm-hmm. And I think I'm too close to it. I can argue both sides, but I think you could easily make an argument that these tests, if they simply didn't exist, students would be better off in many ways. What I worry about is the vacuum that might create and what would fill it.
Right.
And I'm not sure that we would, that the system would tolerate not having an alternative. And I'm not sure that where all of that anxiety and energy would flow wouldn't go to something that'd be, equally or more problematic in a different way. Mm-hmm. So I just did not give you a straight answer.
That's okay. Well, no, what I'm appreciating is like the candor and the sort of let's pause a moment and let's consider the larger thing, the philosophical implications. And then I want to shift it to, for the purposes of this podcast, I want to, for folks who are listening, and that's parents or students or counselors, I want to answer, because you have been doing this for so long, I want to answer some of the, the questions that come up for folks, because I haven't really covered test prep. I've done some short, really practical ones, but we haven't really covered sort of the big picture thing. So I want to ask you some of the questions that I get asked a lot and hear you riff on them. Cool?
Great.
So
absolutely.
Great. So one of the big ones that comes up a lot is students want to know, what's a quote unquote good score? Or what's a good score for a particular school? And so I'm interested in this on two levels. On one, well, just, what is that? How do you answer that question when students ask you that? But also, how can counselors help students figure out an answer for that question?
It's always the first question, and it's a question that has all kinds of anxiety wrapped around it, and it is really the wrong question. So what we try to do is provide a, satisfying or at least informative answer and a starting point, but then that really should be a springboard into more meaningful questions. So first, sometimes we simply need to educate families that a good score, if you're thinking that means like what is the minimum or what's the cutoff, that it really doesn't work that way. Or I should say there's very, at most places, especially highly selective colleges where admission is claimed to be very holistic, that's not the way it works. In some contexts, there are university systems where there are effectively cutoffs or minimums, but generally speaking, it's this kind of like it's spectrum where the answer is, well, the higher the better. And what we do to start out, see, when I'm asked these questions by families who really are seeking answers and need guidance, need context, I really try to give a straight, crisp answer first. Because then I feel like I can go on and say what I really want to say and I have their attention. So on this question, we go to great length to develop this resource we call the Compass 360. that takes that question and connected ones for about 360, now approaching 400 colleges, and says, here are the stats. So at this college, here is the middle 50th percentile test scores for admitted students. Now, that just tells you what ballpark you might want to be in to feel like you are competitive.
Right.
It doesn't mean that scores below that, students never get in. Doesn't mean that scores above that, you automatically get in. But here's a ballpark. And usually the context for this is, I'm a 10th grade parent. I just got my kid's first PSAT score. It's the first time I've seen a score like this in years. Where do we stand? What kind of ballpark are we in? Right. And that's perfectly good to look at it that way. And you could scan our list and see, okay, so here's the ballpark we're in. But here's what I dread is the family who is thinking that the way to approach testing in general is to gun for a certain score. And below that is failure, above that is success, and that will, determine everything. That is the wrong mindset, and we aggressively try to knock that down. But like I say, you need to give good data-driven answers, before you then have somebody willing to hear kind of the broader philosophical piece. Great,
yeah. Usually it comes up like, I got a 1350. Can I get into USC? And like, what does a kid do with that? What I'm hearing you say is like, well, go to, find out from USC, like what is the range of, scores that they're acceptable. And also there's another part of it, right? This is just one piece of the puzzle. One of the other questions that comes up a lot is how much do these scores matter? What do you say when folks ask that?
How much they matter depends tremendously on the institution and what you're prepared to bring to it. I always go back to USC as a context. I have good friends who run admissions there who are great people. I love this quote from them. They said, one, we don't use these scores with the precision that students and parents think we do, because they're not designed that way, and because to do so would be unfair. Full stop. So I think that was great. Another just kind of off the cuff comment they made I thought was wonderful. They said, and sometimes, although we require the scores, sometimes we hold our nose as we use them. And that was their way of saying, we know, we're human. We know all the ways in which these tests and what they do to kids is really problematic and flawed. Okay? We get it. But here's our context. USC, 55,000 applications from more than 140 countries. And this is the kicker to me, more than 10,000 high schools. So as much as USC, they run a great admissions team, really big staff. They try to learn every applicant's unique context and understand the school and what a particular high school's transcript kind of means. For them, it's still useful to have a independent, separate measure that is standardized, that gives some context to everything else in the application, and particularly to the transcript and grades. Test scores are modestly helpful.
Mm-hmm. Then let's go the other way. I want to swing the pendulum all the way out and ask, do students even need the tests? And talk to me a little bit about test optional. There's a whole podcast for those who are interested on test optional. But yeah, what's your thought on that?
The test optional movement has been surging in the last decade. And I think it's this wonderfully progressive, positive movement within college admission. So what you have, you can look at it this way. First, kind of look at the landscape. So depending on how you define what's a college or university, which you could look at different ways, there's several thousand. Okay. Fully 1,000 of those are test optional, meaning that they do not require test scores for all or a substantial number of their applicants. Now, if you parse that list, and we have we have a resource that does this, you find that there aren't that many colleges that are terribly selective in the first place that are also on that list. So many of those test optional colleges that are saying we don't require scores, they never really use scores much in their process anyway. But if you look at the list, let's liberal arts colleges. So Wesleyan, okay, Pomona, liberal arts colleges. If you look at the top 100 according to U.S. News, slightly more than half are now test optional. They will fully consider your application without test scores. For some, you need test scores for scholarships, but can be considered for admission at more than half of those without scores. But here's the thing. So as a student, could I in 10th or 11th grade say, you know what, I'm just going to ignore tests entirely and only apply to colleges that are test optional, you could. And that would in 2018 not be, a crazy thing. And we're actually seeing a handful of kids that are looking at it that way. And in a few cases, we're the ones that said, do that. So the scenario would be this. So if you're a student by 11th grade, you know that taking these standardized multiple choice, intense, fast-paced tests is never going to be your thing. And test scores have always just under predicted what you're capable of, and you've got, by comparison, very strong grades. I would recommend taking a long, hard look at the test optional list and making sure at least some test optional schools are in the pool of colleges to which you apply, period. But here's the problem. If you're aiming high in terms of selectivity, even at the highly selective test optional schools, the vast majority of applicants still submit test scores. And the average score, our median score at those places has only been rising, since they've gone test optional. So it doesn't mean that test optional doesn't mean that it now got easier to get into, super competitive colleges, but it gives students another path, and it's worth considering if scores are not a strength for you. Clearly, you will have more options if you are able to take tests and do well on them relative to your grades. Sorry, not a short answer,
no,
but you can imagine
fine.
if you own a test prep company, it's on your mind.
Well, okay. So assuming students are going to take the test, they've decided, okay, this is something I'm going to do. When do they take it? What's the advice that you give on that?
There's a window within which you're most developmentally ready to take the test. And then unfortunately, the trend in recent years has been for kids to feel pressure to take the test earlier and earlier. You might find interesting that the greatest number of students who take the test every year, take the SAT, only take it once and don't take it until fall of senior year. Wow. These are typically kids who are the first generation in their family to go to college, who go to a high school where there's a really high, student to counselor ratio, and they're not receiving a lot of sophisticated advice early in the process. Or in their lives, there's all kinds of challenges that, interfere with or just pull away from attention given to, massaging the college process. What I see within, the population of students who are very sophisticated and ambitious around college is the tendency to overdo it. And this attitude that surely more is more when it comes to testing and attention given to test prep and so forth. And the trend is to start too early. Doing formal test prep and taking the test officially in 10th grade or earlier is not necessary and is not appropriate. That's giving the test, way more credit than they're due. Preparing for these tests and doing your best on them, does not take 2 to 3 years. It takes 2 to 3 months, or in some case, maybe 6 to 12 months. But I'm going to say this just very bluntly. I'm sorry if I'm offending any of your listeners who do things differently. But when I see test prep companies, offering, 2 to 3 year programs, packages, plans, starting kids in 8th and 9th grade, I think it's unethical. Because the fact is that kids who are challenging themselves academically and also reading outside of school, they are doing test prep in 9th and 10th grade. If you're taking the toughest math class you can handle at your school and working as hard in it as you can, that's test prep. Mm-hmm. So in 11th grade, perfectly appropriate to do something formal or informal to prepare for the test and kind of polish what you've learned and learn the specific test-taking skills. But that is not a multi-year proposition. Right. And people who act like it is, I think, clearly are acting out of self-interest. Right. So here's a question. When is the right time to take it officially? For most students, the first sitting should be spring of 11th grade. It's often March if it's the SAT, February or April if it's the ACT. But what you're trying to do is kind of hedge it perfectly. On the one hand, the longer you wait until you take the test, the older you will be. So developmentally, the further you are along with not just hard academic skills, especially our just reading comprehension ability and vocabulary skills, but also just kind of the toughness that it takes to sit for a 3 to 4 hour exam that's high stakes and keep up your endurance and focus and manage your anxiety all of that tends to be, developing. And when you're older, you do better. And the data shows that most students do not peak on these tests until fall of 12th grade or the very end of 11th grade at the earliest. So that this trend of students sitting for the test officially, even in fall of 11th grade, in most cases, it's not productive. And what they're doing is effectively putting a practice test score on their record. Very few students can peak on these tests in fall of 11th grade or even winter. Most need more time.
Yeah.
So waiting until spring of 11th is the right time. And even though I sometimes get asked the opposite question, Ethan, people say, well, developmentally, you're unlikely to peak until fall of 12th. Why don't you just wait until then? And that's actually not a bad idea, but for most families, that's too nerve-wracking.
Right. They
want to go into the fall feeling like a 12th grade, feeling like I've got a good idea of where I stand. I'm finalizing my college list. I want to be mostly settled with testing by then.
Great. So students often wonder, what's the difference between the SAT and ACT? How do I know which one I should take? What's your thought?
First, you have a choice. It's your choice. There's no college in the country that has a meaningful preference one way or the other. It's up to you. The tests have a lot in common, but some really key differences that you understand by experiencing them. So here's the advice in a nutshell. Make sure before you decide what test you're going to pursue officially, and certainly before you start any formal test prep, take a diagnostic test for both. Your school may do this for you in the form of a PSAT and or a pre-ACT, but the best practice to me is summer before 11th grade or fall of 11th grade, take complete diagnostic tests, which are readily available from the testing agencies or from test prep companies, and see if there's a clear winner based on the scores. The key is this: try to make the decision correctly up front. And what you want to avoid is a situation where you're not ever sure which one you should have taken, and you go back and forth between both. You take both multiple times. You even get lured into some shady test prep that's combo that covers both. These are things to try to avoid. And taking diagnostic tests up front is the way to do that.
Great. And we'll say a little bit more about that guide that he just mentioned, this resource. We'll say more about that resource in a few minutes. So what about this? And in terms of the differences, and we can link to this in the show notes, but just give me a quick, a short version, if you can, Adam, about the difference between the SAT and ACT.
Well, both tests fundamentally are about the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, right? And the overhaul of the SAT in the last 2 to 3 years really aligned it to a large extent with the ACT in terms of being about this fundamental academic content. Parents listening, the SAT you took 20, 30 years ago, you would not recognize today's SAT. Back then, it was all about esoteric vocab words and math that felt like logic puzzles. And to a large extent, that has been stripped away. Here's some of the differences, though. So both tests put you on the clock and force you to, at speed, read a dense passage on something maybe that's not interesting to you, and then answer finicky questions that really kind of parse what is there. Here's a difference. The SAT, that's the first piece of the test at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's 65 minutes long. Or if you have extended time, 1 hour, 37 and a half minutes. The ACT, the reading comprehension, comes up 2 hours into the test after a break. It's only 35 minutes long, so it's much, much shorter. But on the ACT, it's faster paced. There's fewer seconds per question allotted. So this always comes down to, when you examine the test, as I'm advising you to do, it's a lesser evil situation.
Right.
On which of the two tests, and all the different mix of structural differences and pacing and different kind of format of questions, what netted out for me as least worst. And the process of taking practice tests and evaluating them side by side, you figure out, okay, for me, endurance is more of an issue than having to work faster for a shorter period of time.
Right.
And I go on. On math, the ACT is very sort of straightforward in its structure. 60 minutes, 60 questions, all multiple choice, calculator allowed. SAT covers mostly the same academic content or similar content, but does it in a different way structurally. There are some questions that are not multiple choice, where you must get your own answer. There are some questions that don't allow a calculator. It's broken up over 2 sections. It's not quite as fast-paced. Is that better for you? No one can say. So here's another quick takeaway. Do not rely on any generalizations or kind of old wives' tales you hear about which test is better or easier or better for a certain type of learner. All of that is bunk.
Great. And what about the optional essay? Do students need that?
This is a tough one. This essay, talking to the essay guy, boy, oh boy, is it problematic. It's fairly recent development. On the end of each test, after 3 hours of almost all multiple choice, you have an optional essay that for the ACT is 40 minutes, SAT is 50 minutes. It's on a topic not given in advance. You're essentially writing a hurried rough draft, and then it's scored by human beings. And it's so for some students, it's just a very unfamiliar, awkward exercise, not something that they're used to doing. It's the opposite of how they have to write for a school. The thing is the scoring is very well known, and it's not hard to learn kind of what the topics are going to look like, what kind of approaches are rewarded, how the scoring works, and you should absolutely practice. You should write a couple of sample essays at least, so that you're familiar with what that activity looks and feels like. Here's the frustrating thing. Technically, the essay is optional, and nationally, only about 10% of colleges require it. However, for 11th graders taking the test and not yet having a final college list, the safe bet is to include the essay with your test. You don't want to be fall of senior year adding a college to your list, say the University of Michigan, and realizing, oh shoot, I need the essay and I don't have it. And in that scenario, you'd have to take the entire test again. So to avoid that, even though 10% of colleges, only 10% require it, nationally, the data shows nearly 2/3 of students take it. And in our office, 1,000 students a year we work with, it's nearly 100% because it's the safe bet. So to sum that up, treat the optional essay as recommended, safer to take it. Do some minimal preparation for it, even on your own. We have in this guide that we're referring to, 6 to 8 page spread on what it looks like and how to approach it. And you should be fine.
Great. This is kind of a several part question, but oftentimes students are like, how many times should I take it? Colleges, they're going to see all my scores, and does it even matter? What are your thoughts?
Do not be a serial test taker who takes the test 4, 5, 6 times and starts too early.
Right.
When I worked briefly in admissions, we would see that. So I recommend that in almost all cases, students take the test at least twice. Unless your first score is, you crush it or you're one and done, most students benefit from a second sitting, even without a lot of formal prep. The data show that there's significant improvement in most cases from the first or the second test. And no college is going to look sideways at you for taking it twice. Taking it a third time is where it starts to become debatable. And there's still not colleges that really are going to worry about that. But it's in many cases, if you've been well prepared, knew what you were doing the first and second time, oftentimes then your score is going to have leveled off. Mm-hmm. And any further improvement, the law of diminishing returns now applies. It's going to be hard to eke out further improvement. So the question to retake really comes down to a careful assessment of whether there's still significant likelihood of improving. When you go to apply to colleges, so it's a question of will colleges see all my scores? The answer generally is no. It's up to you. You have an option called score choice provided by College Board and ACT that lets you selectively report test dates. Mm-hmm. So if you completely bombed the April ACT and you just killed it in September, at most colleges you could send only the September result and not reveal that earlier blemish. But basically, there's no disadvantage to taking it more than once. At worst, colleges will simply look at your best overall test date. Last but not least, there's a small problem, and it's small, but there are a handful of colleges, probably a little more than a handful, that prohibit score choice, that in some way restrict or prohibit altogether you exercising score choice. You apply to Georgetown, Stanford, you're going to sign a statement on the application stipulating that you reported all your scores, that you did not exercise score choice. There's different rules and wrinkles of that, which we explain in our resources. But here's the thing. I don't think there's a witch hunt for, really erratic, weird test taking. But the fact that some colleges prohibit score choice, to me, is just one more reason why, if you're in 9th or 10th grade right now thinking about a testing plan, you don't want to overdo it. Mm-hmm. If you do, there might be some colleges where you have to reveal that, and that's probably not helpful.
For the
most part, though, you control your scores.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. What's the most number of times you've heard of somebody taking the ACT or SAT?
I've taken it dozens of times.
You have. Well, are there any like ridiculous student examples where a student took it like?
Wait, you're not recording this, are you? Right. No, I've taken it many times, and the test prep people do that. That's actually a thing. I've had a poor kid who came to us not until fall of 12th grade, and his parents had him taking it every time it was offered since the beginning of 10th grade. Mm-hmm. And it was really just, they didn't realize that was not necessary, not advisable. Kid, of course, was totally burned out. That would have been, if revealed to colleges, would have looked a little bit crazy. Mm-hmm. And really, they had wasted a lot of money and a lot of time.
Yeah. Totally
unnecessary. As I said earlier, doing formal stuff like that at 9th and 10th grade, it's almost always premature. So it was just, hey, he hadn't listened to a podcast like this, and it was just ill-advised decision.
The data podcast.
Shows us this.
Yeah.
The wrong podcast. Yeah. The data shows that the vast majority of students only take it once or twice. A large number, nearly a couple 100,000 out of 2 million, take it a third time. Mm-hmm. But vanishingly small numbers of kids take it 4, 5, 6 times or more. And in many cases, those are recruited athletes trying to be eligible.
Yeah.
So 2, maybe 3 times is the sweet spot.
Do you enjoy taking the test?
Yeah. Do you enjoy writing essays, Ethan?
Writing them? I enjoy writing. Do I enjoy? And I've done it too. I've taken it a couple times since when I was in test prep, I took it a couple times, and I did enjoy it. There was like a lightness, and it was kind of fun, and it was kind of weird to roll up in my Carolina blue sweats and to see the kid sit next to me like, who's the dude with the beard? So that was kind of fun, like in an outsider way. But yeah, I don't know. What do you like about it? I'm just curious.
Well, here's what I like about it is it's just when I'm taking it, I've taken every test that's ever been released, and I've taken the test formally dozens of times. Let me really quickly, I'm not going to be a shill for test prep today, but let me give you an anecdote that I think is relevant to your listeners. So when I take the test, I get through the sections pretty quickly, right? I have time to look around and sort of take in what's happening. Every student in the room, I can, just based on their facial expressions and their body language, I can conclude one of 2 things about them. And I don't know, their ability per se, but the kids who look like they're managing it, they have a look of determination and focus and resolve on their face. I know that those kids, they came in knowing what to expect. Maybe they didn't spend thousands of dollars on a fancy tutoring service for the test, but they at least got their hands on practice tests, which are free, readily available.
Right.
And they sat through these dress rehearsals. In the same way, you don't go out and run a marathon. You got to build up for it. And without knowing their ability, I know that they were much more likely scoring to their potential than the other kids who have a look of just utter dismay and just shock on their face. They're just completely blown away by just how exhausting the test is, or how fast-paced it feels, or how they didn't know, there's going to be a section with no calculator, just basic stuff.
Right.
And that is totally avoidable. It's not an arms race here. You can do your best if you practice on your own and use good resources and take it really seriously. So my message there is don't assume these tests are just this kind of CAT scan of your brain and they're going to be what they're going to be. They reflect practice. And a lot of the skill and experience that helps you reach your peak score is simply a function of being willing to work at it.
Right. Talk to me about subject tests. What's your take on those? Who needs them? Students are asking me, which ones should I take? When should I take them? What's a good score?
In our resources, we keep a very up-to-date list of what colleges require them and which ones don't. Here's a stat that maybe would surprise some folks. 10 years ago, 44 colleges explicitly required subject tests and would not consider your application without them. And you can imagine that 44 was, you would know every name on that list. As of this year, only 4 colleges remain that explicitly require the subject tests. And it's places like MIT and Caltech. So Harvey Mudd and Cornell. So places renowned for their engineering programs. This kind of begs the question, though. Did those other 40 colleges over that time frame become, easier to get into or less interested in what subject tests measure? No, of course not. What's happening is it's kind of like the test optional movement. colleges, to their credit, are saying what in our process and in our requirements discourages applications from underrepresented students. And subject tests are a little bit, obscure, not offered as often, something some kids just don't hear about. So colleges have made them, in many cases, not required but recommended, or language like will consider.
Right.
Here's the thing, though. Harvard is an example. Dartmouth, their language goes like this: subject tests are recommended. However, if taking them would represent a financial hardship for you, then they are not required. So you have to, as a student, think about your own context. And if you went to a school where, you knew about subject tests and a lot of other kids were taking them, and clearly based on your background, they were within your wheelhouse, then you're probably not as competitive if you don't. But on the other hand, the colleges are very clear in saying they are truly not required. The key with subject tests, if you need them, is to take the right ones at the right time. So generally speaking, you're going to want to choose subjects that correspond with your greatest academic strengths. So if you're in honors or AP U.S. history, taking the subject test in U.S. history would probably be a good idea. And you want to take it at the end of the school year when you would be peaking in that material anyway. So that's the key with subject tests. Do I need them? If so, which one should I take? And then taking them at the right time.
We haven't talked at all about the PSAT. Will you say a few just words about it? What is it relevant? What does it matter? How does national merit work? Just a little about that. Yeah.
Sure. The PSAT will not hurt you. It can help you if in 10th grade you take it and you do phenomenally well and you're in the running for national merit scholarship consideration, which we write about. But it can't hurt you. And just to be clear, when you take it in the 10th grade, if your school offers that, you're taking the practice for the practice test. So the stakes couldn't be lower and you shouldn't stress out about it. However, you should take it seriously. You take it seriously, you get data back, you get a score that is really useful as a planning tool. The College Board has a really wonderful connection now, PSAT reporting, that funnels you into Khan Academy, their do-it-yourself sort of test prep platform. So take the PSAT when it's offered, take it seriously, then you have a planning tool to work from, but know that it can't be used against you. Also know that after you take the PSAT, your mailbox is going to blow up because your name's now in the College Board database. Colleges purchase that, and you start getting lots of very slick marketing material from colleges.
Adam, talk to me about accommodations for students with learning differences.
This is something important to know about. If you receive accommodations for learning differences at your school, you have an IEP or the equivalent in a private school, there should be a liaison at your school who would help you go through the process to apply for accommodations on the SAT or ACT. And it's important to get those accommodations if you qualify for them. And then I think it's also important to then practice with those same accommodations. This is really detailed. We elaborate on it at length in our resource and in blog posts, for whom it applies. But know that it's an option out there if you have learning differences that's documented and for which you receive accommodations, and if so, you should pursue it.
Yeah, this is a good segue. Will you talk to us about this resource? Because I just think it's awesome and more people should know about it. So set it up for us. Tell us about the resource, why you created it, and what's in it.
So for years and years and years, going back, 20 plus years, high schools have invited me or my colleagues to come and speak. And one year, this was 2004, we thought, you know what, let's go in tonight with a really beefy handout. And what we did is we put together something that was what we use in our own advising of students. So all the nuts and bolts that you need to know about the test to answer all the finicky questions. So we did like that on about a 15-page handout. I made a bunch of copies for everybody who attended, and oh my goodness, they loved it. And the counselors, told a bunch of friends, and then thought, okay. So let's take our own internal, tools, and let's create a kind of an accessible version of it and see if that's helpful to folks. And 15 years later, that is now a book, about 100 pages. And what it tries to do is answer with detail and kind of real substance any possible question one could think of about college admission testing. Mm-hmm. So if you can think of it, the answer should be in there. And if not, tell me what wasn't there, and it'll be in the next edition. So here's what it is. It's a hardcover book that we provide, in print to every counselor that we can reach. It's also available for free as a PDF or as an iBook. So anybody can download it. I think you're going to make it available completely free. please use it, and it's really helpful. Here's the other thing. There are some topics. See, college admission testing, it's all about lists and all the different restrictions and policies and rules and just things that aren't the same at every college, like who requires subject tests, who does super scoring and who does not, who prohibits score choice, who requires the SAT and ACT essay. These are all fundamentally about lists.
Right.
So those lists are constantly kept up to date in companion resources on our website. But the bottom line is, if you get a copy of the guide and you refer to it, and when you need to jump from it to the companion resource on our website, you're set. You will not make a mistake with something in the nitty-gritty know-how of the test. The other thing, and honestly, this is only our power users, but if you read it cover to cover, you're going to get a really good perspective on what these tests are all about, how they're really used by colleges, what the scores do and don't say about a student's ability, and what a reasonable but also successful approach to test prep is going to look like. So I'd encourage, I think if you've got a podcast listener who's made their way through this session, might also be a reader, and do check it out. I think it's really worth your time.
I agree. I just want to second that. It's when I first came upon it years ago, I was like, holy cow, this is awesome. This is everything, Talk to me as we sort of wrap up here. I'm curious, when imagining that it's spring of 12th grade and, students are looking back on testing and everything, how do you feel like, this is kind of a philosophical question, how do you feel like students should define success?
It's a great question. Here's the thing. The families that we work with, in many cases, we stay in touch with them after the student goes off to college. And I have never in my life talked to a parent who says, you know what, my daughter's now away at college and she's miserable, and if only she had done more test prep and testing, then I bet she'd be happy. Like, I've never had that conversation.
Right.
That doesn't happen. What has happened too often is I've just been aware of a student, either as it was happening or afterwards, who was just getting demolished by college admission anxiety generally and attention to these tests specifically. And, she got burned out. Way too much of her time and energy, in this kind of really meaningful period of her life was consumed by dealing with tests and other aspects of admission. And she's now arrived at college and forgot how to love anything having to do with education, and maybe, frayed relationship with your parents. That scenario, I've seen it too often. What I would say to a parent listening is, how could that possibly be worth it? Right. I don't care what the college admission outcome was. There were other solid outcomes that could have been, reached without overdoing it. So don't overdo testing. And I think a good way to think about this is, with tests, what are you trying to achieve as a parent? You want the student to reach his or her potential, whatever that may be. And what I would submit to you is, you want to also have them reach that potential as efficiently as possible.
Right.
Nothing virtuous about being the one who did the most test prep and testing. So as a parent, if you were always asking yourself with these tests and planning and so on, are we doing it right? And are we doing enough? But also, in the same breath, are we not doing too much?
Yeah.
Let's give these tests the attention they deserve, but let's also try not to give them 1 second more than that. That is a really healthy mindset that I think then will flow to the student as just a much kind of better context that puts them in a better place, less heartache.
That's
a good thought.
That's a beautiful thought.
Okay.
It's a beautiful thought to leave folks with. Time for show and tell. So, Adam, what's a resource or something in your life that's adding meaning or adding value?
Well, I think of something that I read. I'm looking around my office here. I have on my coffee table, I have a book, Obama: An Intimate Portrait by Pete Souza, who was his official White House photographer.
Huh.
And it's about 350 pages of just beautiful photography. And what I like about it, it's regardless of your political positions, what you see when you look at this book is someone who was a really, I think, sensitive, courageous leader. And every image you look at, you see someone who is just deeply human, who seems to be maintaining perspective despite just the incredible pressures and complexities around him. So for me, it's centering. It's a beautiful book, and I've read it or watched it cover to cover, looked at every picture and every caption. what's kind of cool about it is there's so many pictures, you can't, even if you're very familiar with it, open it up randomly to a page. And without fail, you're going to find an image that kind of recenters you. And it's a really powerful book. I'd recommend it to anyone.
I love it. As you're talking, I'm looking at my my Google Chrome extensions, and I just thought this would be a funny opportunity for my show and tell to share what my Google Chrome extensions and why I have them. So one of them is my YouTube ad block, which means I don't get ads on YouTube, which is great.
Nice.
Another one is Boomerang, which allows me to send emails later if I want to, or if I have an email that I don't want to deal with right now and I want to email it back to me in a day, I can do that. That's Boomerang. Loom allows me to record videos just really quickly.
Nice.
I can just click on that. And then I've got one from C Alpha, which is, a really cool company that has all the essay prompts. When I just click on that, I can type in the name of the school and it'll give me the essay prompts. But my favorite one this is like a 5-part show and tell. My favorite one is the Google Chrome Death Clock. Do you know about this?
I don't.
When I open up a new tab, and I'm going to do it now. When I open up a new tab, I get I get the number of days, hours, minutes, and seconds in my life based on average life expectancy. And there's a beautiful image behind it. And there's just the words, make them count. So according to this, I have 14,424 days, 12 hours, 34 minutes, and 18, 17, 16 seconds left. And so it's asking me, right, it's putting that right in my face and going, is this tab really worth it? And it's, some people, I've shared this with my family, they think it's kind of morbid. I think it's kind of awesome because it's making me go like, just becoming even more intentional and reflective of like, is what I'm doing worth it? So that's my favorite one.
That's cool. I'm gonna check that out. Ethan, can I give you a confession here?
Go.
I love Google. I love Google extensions, and this is going to be just such the opposite of what you just shared. Shared. So I have a Chrome extension, and what it does is anytime I'm reading something that has a particular person's name, it's somebody connected to my industry who I really, really don't like.
Yeah.
The Chrome extension replaces that person's name with something kind of mean. So that's. Sorry, I admitted that.
That's amazing.
It's super petty.
That's amazing.
But that ran into my mind.
What is that one called?
These wonderful things with Chrome extensions. You actually can make your own. It's really easy.
What's the extension called? Like, how do you get it?
I made it. I didn't share it. But if you Google make Chrome extension, this is one of the top ones. That's a simple word replace tool. And yeah, I don't know if I'd recommend this to children. It's a bit mean-spirited, but I got to admit, when I'm in a bad mood, it helps me feel a little better about something.
There's something in that. Adam, thank you. Thanks so much for your time and your energy and for being with me. Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Ethan. I really, really appreciate what you do. Anybody who's a faithful listener, you know that you're going well beyond, your specialty of essay writing. This is life stuff, and it's great. So thank you.
Thanks for listening. You'll find all the show notes for this episode, which is to say all the links and resources that Adam and I talked about at collegeessayguide.com/podcast. Especially check out, there's this cool 10 question, there are 10 links for the most common standardized test questions. So if you felt like you were just getting, a little bit, it's true. So you'll find links to all those. Plus you'll find this incredible resource that Compass put together. It's called the Compass Guide to College Admissions Testing. And it's about 100 pages long, but it's like a thorough, it answers pretty much everything you need. Check that out on the page. And as always, stay curious.